It's estimated that potentially up to 60% of the construction of Machu Picchu is underground, and these deep foundations were necessary to help with seismic movements and terrace drainage to make sure things would filter properly.
For more than a century, Machu Picchu's terraces have been celebrated as one of history's most brilliant solutions, an achievement so refined, so complete, that few ever thought to question what they were truly built for. But when engineers began examining the data closely, something didn't add up.
Look at that. There we go. Who's that? That could be one of them. Yeah, it looks like it's on a bit of a terrace.
The capacity of what lies beneath far exceeded anything the obvious explanation could justify. And once you understand what this system was actually designed to resist, everything you thought you knew about this place shifts completely. The city that should have slid off the mountain. At nearly 2,400 meters above sea level, Machu Picchu sits in a place modern engineers would immediately flag as a structural nightmare. The ridge is narrow, the slopes plunge sharply on both sides, and beneath the surface lies fractured granite that is constantly shifting. Add to that an annual rainfall that can approach 2,000 millimeters, and you get the perfect conditions for landslides, soil liquefaction, and total collapse. This is not just an inconvenient place to build a city. It is one of the worst possible places. And yet, the city didn't just survive. It endured for over 500 years without sliding into the valley below. Early explorers, including Hiram Bingham in 1911, assumed the terraces were simply agricultural. Flat land was scarce, so the Inca carved steps into the mountain to grow crops like maize and potatoes. Simple, logical. But that explanation started to fall apart the moment engineers began studying the site in detail decades later. Because these terraces are not just dirt platforms, they are engineered systems. Each one is built with layers that look almost identical across the entire mountainside, a level of standardization that feels less like farming and more like manufacturing. And here's where it gets interesting. The Inca moved an estimated hundreds of thousands of tons of stone, gravel, and soil up a mountain without wheels, without iron tools, and without draft animals. Every layer had to be placed deliberately, in sequence, across more than 700 terraces. That is not casual farming effort. That is industrial-scale construction. Even more striking, the location itself begins to look less accidental and more intentional. Machu Picchu sits between two fault lines, right where underground stress and water movement would be most concentrated. According to geological surveys, this area is constantly under pressure, with water seeping through cracks in the bedrock and weakening the structure of the mountain from within. Now pause and think about that. A civilization chooses one of the most unstable, water-saturated, landslide-prone locations in the Andes, and then builds one of the most durable cities in human history right on top of it. That contradiction is where the mystery begins. The hidden blueprint inside every terrace. Once you stop looking at Machu Picchu's terraces as farmland and start looking at a single one up close, the illusion completely breaks. Because what you're actually seeing is not soil stacked on a slope. It's a layered engineering system repeated with near-perfect consistency across an entire mountain. Each terrace is built in 4 distinct layers. At the very bottom, large rough stones create a porous foundation, leaving open spaces for water to move freely. Above that sits a thick layer of gravel, acting like a drainage highway, allowing water to spread laterally instead of building pressure in one spot. Then comes a fine sand layer, functioning as a filter, preventing the topsoil from slipping down while slowing the movement of water. Finally, at the top lies the fertile soil where crops could grow. On the surface, it looks like farming, but underneath, it behaves like a multi-stage filtration system. And here's the part that raises eyebrows among engineers. This exact structure is repeated again and again and again across more than 700 terraces with almost no variation. That level of uniformity suggests planning at a scale far beyond local farming needs. It's closer to something you'd expect from a controlled industrial process. Even more intriguing, studies have shown that much of the gravel and sand used in these layers did not come from the immediate area. It was transported from riverbeds miles away, meaning the Inca were not just using what was available. They were selecting specific materials for specific functions. That changes the question entirely. Because if your goal is simply to grow crops, you don't need this level of precision. A mix of soil and basic drainage would work. Civilizations across the world have done exactly that for thousands of years. But this is overbuilt. It's like installing a high-performance water filtration system where a simple bucket would do the job. And when ancient builders invest that much extra effort, it's usually because they're solving a problem we're not fully seeing yet. Some researchers have even pointed out that when rain hits these terraces, the water doesn't rush off the surface the way it normally would on a steep slope. It disappears, almost instantly, absorbed, filtered, redirected, and quietly moved through the mountain. Which leads to a strange observation. Machu Picchu doesn't behave like a city sitting on a mountain. It behaves like a system controlling one. The water that shouldn't be there. Now here's where things take a turn most people never hear about. Even when there's no rain falling over Machu Picchu, water is still moving through it. Not dripping, not trickling, flowing. Engineers who mapped the site found something unusual. The stone channels, fountains, and drainage paths are not dry systems waiting for storms. They are active almost all the time, carrying a steady supply of water through the city. And that water doesn't behave like surface runoff. It doesn't surge after rain and disappear during dry periods. It remains consistent. That alone suggests a different source, because rainfall is unpredictable, but what flows beneath Machu Picchu is not. The Inca built a series of 16 fountains, carefully stepped down the slope, each one feeding the next in a controlled cascade. The precision is so exact that even slight changes in water volume are stabilized before reaching the next level. That kind of design is not just about access to water. It's about control over pressure and flow rate. And here's a detail most people miss. The primary spring feeding these fountains emerges directly from the fault zone above the city. Not from a river, not from a visible stream, but from inside the mountain itself, which means the Inca were tapping into groundwater that was already under pressure. Modern hydrologists studying the site notice that this spring continues to flow year-round, even during periods when rainfall drops significantly. That consistency strongly suggests that the source is not surface water, but a subsurface reservoir being continuously recharged deep within the mountain system. Now think about what that means. If water is constantly building up beneath the mountain, pushing through fractures, increasing internal pressure, then without control, that pressure would destabilize the entire slope. And suddenly, the terraces don't just look like smart design. They start to look like a response. Some theories go even further, suggesting that the Inca may have observed slow ground movements or small collapses long before construction began. That what they saw wasn't just a mountain, but a system already under stress. And instead of avoiding it, they built directly on top of it, designing a network that could intercept, redirect, and relieve that pressure continuously. A city built on fractures, not stone. Here's the detail that quietly ties everything together and makes the entire site even more unsettling. Machu Picchu is not just built on a mountain, it is built along the exact lines where that mountain is breaking apart. Geological mapping has confirmed that the city sits directly on intersecting fault lines, fractures in the granite that run in multiple directions beneath the site. These are not minor cracks. They are deep structural weaknesses, zones where rock has already been split, shifted, and weakened over time. To a modern engineer, this would be a red flag. You don't build on faults, you avoid them. But the Inca did the opposite. They aligned their entire city with them. Look closely at the layout, the orientation of walls, stairways, drainage channels. They follow the same angles as the underlying fractures. It's so precise that researchers believe the Inca were not just aware of these faults, they were using them as a guide. And this is where it gets fascinating. Those fractures don't just weaken rock, they also act as natural pathways for water, underground channels, pressure routes, points where groundwater rises, moves, and concentrates. So instead of fighting the mountain, the Inca appeared to have studied how it was already behaving, and then designed around it. Stone blocks were cut to fit irregular shapes, locking together without mortar in a way that allows slight movement without collapse. When seismic vibrations occur, the stones can shift and settle back into place. It's not rigid construction, it's flexible stability. Even the terraces themselves mirror these fault directions, almost like extensions of the mountain's internal structure, reinforcing it from the outside. And here's the theory that pushes this even further. Some researchers believe Machu Picchu was intentionally placed at this exact intersection point because it was the most unstable part of the entire ridge. Not in spite of that instability, but because of it. The silence of a disaster that never happened. Stand in Machu Picchu today, and everything feels calm. The terraces are green. The stone paths are steady. Water flows quietly through channels that look almost decorative. Nothing about it suggests danger, but that calm might be the biggest illusion of all. Because when engineers model what should have happened to a mountain like this under this level of rainfall, with this kind of fractured geology, the outcome is almost predictable. Over time, water seeps into the rock, pressure builds, soil weakens, and eventually, part of the slope gives way. Not a slow collapse, a sudden one. A landslide large enough to erase entire sections of the ridge. And yet, it never happened. Not once in over 500 years. That absence is not normal. It's a clue. Because in places across the Andes with similar conditions, landslides are common. Entire hillsides shift, villages disappear, and slopes reshape themselves over time. But here, at Machu Picchu, the mountain has remained unnaturally stable. Which brings us to a theory that doesn't get talked about enough. What if the true success of Machu Picchu isn't what we can see, but what we don't see? No collapsed terraces, no buried structures, no evidence of catastrophic slope failure, just stability. Sustained, controlled stability. The kind that doesn't happen by accident. Some researchers now argue that the terraces, drainage systems, and fault-aligned construction weren't just clever adaptations. They were part of a continuous, passive system designed to prevent a disaster that was already in progress. A system that quietly drains pressure, redirects water, and stabilizes the mountain day after day, year after year. And here's the part that makes it even more unsettling. That system is still working. Water still flows through the channels. The terraces still absorb and release moisture. The mountain is still being managed silently. Without maintenance, without intervention, exactly as it was designed centuries ago. The human cost of building a mountain machine. If everything we've just walked through is true, then one question becomes unavoidable. How much effort did it actually take to build something like this? Because when you strip away the beauty and focus on the raw logistics, the scale becomes almost uncomfortable to think about. Machu Picchu was constructed in the mid-15th century under the rule of Pachacuti, at a time when the Inca had no iron tools, no wheeled transport, and no large draft animals. Everything you see there, every stone, every layer of gravel, every basket of soil, was moved by human hands. Now consider this. Each terrace required multiple layers of material sourced from different locations. The gravel likely came from riverbeds, the sand from specific deposits, and the topsoil from fertile valleys below. That means thousands of trips up steep, narrow mountain paths, carrying loads on backs, one trip at a time. Not hundreds, not thousands, potentially millions of individual journeys. And this wasn't a one-time construction. The system had to be built with precision, each layer placed in the correct order, each angle aligned with the mountain's natural fractures, each drainage path carefully integrated so water would never accumulate in the wrong place. This is not just labor, this is coordination on a massive scale. Historians often point to the Inca labor system, known as mita, where communities contributed work to state projects. But even within that system, the level of effort here stands out. Because this wasn't a road, or a wall, or even a city in the traditional sense. This was a mountain-wide engineering intervention. And here's where it gets even more thought-provoking. For a structure of this complexity, the payoff isn't immediately visible. You don't see instant rewards like abundant harvests or defensive strength. Instead, the benefit is something far less obvious: long-term stability. The prevention of something that might happen years, decades, or even centuries later, which suggests something unusual about the people who built it. They weren't just solving problems for themselves. They were solving problems for the future. Some theories suggest Machu Picchu may have served not only as a royal estate or ceremonial center, but also as a demonstration of control over nature itself, a place where the Inca proved they could take one of the most unstable environments imaginable and force it into balance. The microclimate they secretly engineered. There's one more layer to this that most people completely miss, and it might be the most subtle of all, because beyond stabilizing the mountain and controlling water, Machu Picchu appears to be quietly controlling something else: the climate itself. At that altitude, temperatures can swing rapidly. Intense sun during the day, sharp drops at night, heavy mist rolling in and out within hours. For most crops, and even for human comfort, it's unpredictable and harsh. But the terraces don't just manage water. They absorb heat. During the day, the stone layers beneath each terrace soak up solar energy. Then, as temperatures fall at night, that stored heat is slowly released back into the soil. This creates a buffered thermal environment, reducing extreme temperature swings right at ground level. In simple terms, the terraces flatten the climate. And here's where it gets interesting. Studies comparing terrace zones to non-terraced slopes nearby show measurable differences in temperature stability and soil moisture retention. The terraces hold warmth longer, maintain consistent humidity, and reduce frost risk, all without any active intervention. That means the Inca weren't just engineering for water and stability. They were engineering for microclimate control, and it doesn't stop there. The orientation of many terraces appears to maximize sun exposure, while the stone walls act as windbreaks, slowing down cold mountain air as it moves across the slope. Even the spacing between terraces influences airflow, preventing moisture from becoming trapped, while still retaining enough humidity for crops. This creates a layered environmental effect, where each terrace slightly modifies the conditions of the one above and below it. A cascading system, not just of water, but of temperature and air. Now connect that back to everything we've uncovered. A mountain under internal water pressure, a city aligned with fault lines, a drainage system capable of handling river-scale flow, and on top of all that, a controlled microclimate. At this point, the terraces stop looking like a single-purpose solution. They start looking like a multi-function system designed to regulate everything the mountain throws at it: water, pressure, temperature, and time itself. The precision they achieved without modern tools. At this point, the mystery is no longer just what Machu Picchu does, but how it was even possible to build it this precisely. Because everything about Machu Picchu depends on accuracy, not rough accuracy, not good enough, exact placement. The angle of a drainage channel determines whether water flows safely or builds pressure. The thickness of each terrace layer affects how quickly water filters through. The alignment of stone walls influences how the structure absorbs stress and vibration. And somehow, all of that was achieved without iron tools, without laser measurements, without written blueprints in the way we understand them today. The Inca used stone tools to shape stone. Let that sink in. Yet many of the blocks fit together so tightly that you can't slide a blade between them. Some joints are so precise, they remain intact even after centuries of seismic activity. In fact, during earthquakes, while modern structures in the region have collapsed, Machu Picchu's walls have shifted slightly and then settled back into place. That's not luck, that's engineered flexibility. But here's where it gets even more intriguing. Archaeologists studying unfinished stone blocks at nearby quarries have found markings and shaping patterns that suggest a repeatable method, not random trial and error. The same techniques, the same angles, the same finishing styles appear again and again, almost like a standardized process being followed across teams. Which means this knowledge wasn't isolated. It was shared, taught, reproduced. Some theories suggest the Inca used simple but highly effective tools like plumb bobs, water levels, and alignment cords to achieve consistent measurements. Others propose they relied heavily on empirical testing, refining techniques over generations until the results became predictable. And then there's the more controversial idea that their understanding of stone, pressure, and water flow was far more advanced than we currently give them credit for, not in terms of technology, but in terms of observation. They didn't need complex instruments because they had already learned how the mountain behaves. Drop a comment below and subscribe, because there is a lot more history out there that is not what it seems.